My name's Robin Barnacle. I'm from the School of Graduate Research. I'm the academic lead for research training and development in the grad school, and may well have met some of you already at the induction and other events. And joining me today is Stephanie Markidis. Steph, is that how you pronounce it? I've not had to introduce you before.
Yeah, it's close enough, Robin. No, it was pretty good. Yeah, Stephanie Markidis, and I'm an academic skills advisor in the library. So I work with writing, and really excited to be presenting this here with Robin.
And Steph, go on, because you're also relatively recent PhD success story, aren't you?
That's right. Yes. So I guess I'm evidence that you do eventually get to the other end of the PhD. So I completed my PhD through the School of Media and Communication, and it was conferred in April. So I submitted it earlier this year during the bushfires. Actually, I remember it was a very stressful time. And my PhD was in creative practice and creative writing. So I'm really interested in those kind of alternate forms of thesis writing, and this idea of creative and critical thinking, and how we can use language to support both of those types of thinking within our PhDs. Thank you, Navina. Thank you, Eppley. Yeah, it's been, I got to say, it feels really great to finish and to feel yourself kind of unclench a little bit at the other side. So it does happen. It does happen.
It can, yeah. I can feel like such a long way off. So we're presenting this webinar today on literature reviews, structuring literature reviews, and it's actually the first of two. So if you're interested, there is another related webinar next Wednesday on writing, more about the writing, the approach to the writing, and that you take in the lit review. So you're getting lots of congratulations there, Steph. So if you're interested, follow up with that one next week. So today we're focusing very much on the structure of literature reviews, and we're drawing on a slide pack that's been put together by some colleagues in the library, who, particularly Judy Maxwell and Dana. And Judy's actually recently retired, and some of you may have come across Judy because she's been with us for years and running PhD Up seminars. So if you know Judy, she's recently retired and she's having a wonderful time. I know that she actually misses you all, though, because she does say that whenever I talk to her, she's like, she really loved this work. So anyway, let's get cracking. So I've got this thing up on my screen that, there, I've got rid of it now. So just a reminder, I know everyone's become so used to webinar etiquette, but just to remember to turn off your audio and video. The text box chat is live, and we will be, reviewing that throughout the presentation. So please use that as liberally as you like. You're also welcome to put your hand up if you've got a particular question or comment to make. We are already recording the session, and we do that so that people who can't make it can listen in. So just be aware of that. Is there anything else I need to add there, Steph?
No, you've covered it all.
No. Okay, so we've got 5 topics today. Just to say from the outset, because it's a webinar, we've kind of crunched the session into an hour. Normally, if we could consider actually trying to make it a bit longer, but anyway, it would normally be a bit longer. So some of the exercises that are in the slide pack we're not going to do today, but you are welcome. You can have the slide pack. Are we going to share that via the chat, Steph, or one way or another?
It will be sent in an email after the session.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of handy for you guys as participants, because you'll get you can see the recording of the session, but also the slides, and some of those exercises we don't do, you're welcome to do in your own time. But we'll still talk through them, and there's hopefully you won't feel like you're missing out. So I'm starting to talk faster already, I can tell, because I suddenly think, oh my goodness, we've got a lot to get through. So the outline, there's 5 things we're going to be talking about today. So the overall purpose of the lit review, its place in the thesis, in the whole thesis, looking at the structure of the components of a literature review, how to organise the body of the lit review, and also capturing and synthesising themes. So they're the topics. Okay, so first up, what is a literature review? Very important question. Actually, I should just say too, I'm mindful. It's great to see all of you here, 80 PhD Masters for Research candidates. So you are coming to us and we're gathering here today. You're from all over the university. So there's a lot of different disciplinary backgrounds and contexts. So what we're going to try and focus on is the sort of generic, universal questions about what a lit review is. You will need to think about what does this mean in the context of your research and your disciplinary practices. I'm just conscious that I've got 2 kids behind me making a lot of noise, and I bet some of you have this issue too. I'm just going to hop up and close a door. So I'm going to leave it to Steph for 2 seconds. Sorry.
Yeah, what Robin was saying is totally correct. We're here gathering from all across the university, and while we might have different approaches to what a literature review looks like or how it's structured, regardless of that, you have to show that you are reviewing literature. So these kinds of things we'll be talking about in this webinar are applicable to all of us.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. And we should have a webinar on how to write a literature review while managing homeschooling and all the rest, because I'm pretty sure I know a lot of you are juggling these issues too. Okay, so first up, just to have a bit of a think about what you reckon a literature review is and what they do, what you do in a literature review. So there's 10 points here. So just have a look at them all and have a think about what do you think, which ones do you think are accurate? So which of those statements do you agree with? What would you disagree with? And what are you more unsure about? So just give you a couple of minutes to read through that list. What do literature reviews do? So do they provide the correct view of the single body of knowledge in a particular area or particular topic? Do they discuss work that is not specifically relevant to your research topic but interesting? We know how we've got to cross against that one, and I think that's for obvious reasons. It's easy to go down a sidetrack and think, oh, that's interesting, but may not be relevant to your literature review. Would you only include publications from academic journals or books? So just scholarly, only cite scholarly texts? Would you only include studies that agree with the argument you're hoping to make or your hypothesis? Literature reviews, should they neutrally list and summarise pieces of relevant research? Hi Rachel, good to see you've got a few ideas. So you'd say 2, 5, 8 and 9 with sum of 10. Sum of 10, that's a considered approach. So criticise perhaps not all of the cited literature. I'd like to hear from someone else. Anyone else got some views? What is approach 2, 5, 8? Show that you're aware of the important issues in your research area. That sounds like a pretty good hunch. 8, identify gaps in the existing research. Let me go to the next slide. So here's a bit of a, I think the slide pack, right, Steph, I think we've just hit where actually some of these ticks and things were meant to pop in and some weren't. Provide show you're aware of the important issues in your research area, tick, pretty much. I think I would agree with that one.
Can I just say, Robin, I'm looking at the slides into PowerPoint, and some of those ticks have shifted up or down a little bit.
Oh my goodness, so this is a bit, okay. So let me just go to the next slide. So this is what happens when you using someone else's slide pack. Why is 5 crossed out? Can you explain that again? 5. Position your research in the context of what is known, not known.
Now,
I agree. I think 5 should be in.
So I can see, Robin, I can see on my slide pack that I've opened in PowerPoint, sort of where those ticks should be. So it's really good to see that people in the chat are picking up on this, because there's been a bit of shifting.
So it's a bit of a, sorry.
I'm happy to kind of let you know what the real reveal is, if you like.
Oh, that's right. Let's go to the poll. So here's a bit of a poll. And so in this, if you just put into the chat what you think, which of these do you think is accurate, or are none of them accurate? So I guess say 1, 3, 9, or none, or all. I think that's your 4 options, aren't there? So provide the correct view of the single body of knowledge in an area, or include all the relevant literature in your topic up until submission. Or neutrally list and summarize pieces of relevant research. I think you guys are all over this.
They've come prepared, Robin.
They've come prepared. I think you've all done it before. Okay, so what is a literature review? I think you guys are on it. Here's the definition. A literature review is a critical analysis and evaluation of the scholarly works. Now, I would actually question that. I think generally scholarly, but I think it's also justified to include other texts that are relevant. So, say government policy, depending on your research, or there may be, I guess, what often gets called the grey literature. So it isn't necessarily academic or scholarly, but it's still, if it's relevant to your research, then it may also be relevant to your lit review. Sorry, now I interrupted my sentence. So a lit review is critical analysis and evaluation of scholarly works related to a particular area of research. It contextualises your research project within the body of knowledge related to your topic. So that's a pretty good general. What do you think, Steph? Would you actually expand that a little bit to include wider than literature? So also so like in the creative practice field, it would be a little broader, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is where what we were talking about before, about the fact that we're all from different disciplines. This is where we can start to think about how literature reviews relate to our specific disciplines. But absolutely, in creative practice, you would include perhaps creative works in your review of literature. And you might also find that your community of practice becomes part of your literature review, because you are communing with ideas and practices, and so you're reviewing all of that literature together. But I think one really interesting part to highlight here is in that first line, the literature review is a critical analysis and evaluation. So it's really not a neutral piece of text. You're actually you're making arguments here, and you're making your position known.
And I think that's what gets perhaps a little bit more emphasis on it in this. This is another example of a definition of a literature review. This is from the work of Kamler and Thompson, who we draw on quite a lot in our materials at RMIT. They're both higher education research scholars. So a little bit more detail here. Literature reviews sketch out the nature of the field or fields relevant to the inquiry. This may include historical development if that's relevant, identifying major debates and contentious terms. So that, of course, is about what's the idea that research and knowledge is always what's the word I'm looking for? Contested. So where are the debates? Where's the sites of where there's a disagreement, where people have different views about something? So in order to establish which studies, ideas, and/or methods are most pertinent or relevant to the study that you're doing, locates the gaps in order to create the warrant for the study in question. So warrant's an unusual term really, but you're making a case for why the research that you're doing is necessary. What's the gap that it's addressing, that you're filling? So the lit review does really important work in your thesis. And then it informs the basis. It's on that basis that you can make a claim about a potential contribution to knowledge. Just to sort of try and contextualize that a bit more, in the beginning when you're writing your literature review and when you're working towards a COC, confirmation of candidature, you're developing a research proposal. At that point, the literature review is making a claim for the potential for a contribution to knowledge. By the time you're finishing and you're writing your thesis for submission, that you're using that to form the basis to defend the claim that you have made a contribution to knowledge. But in the beginning, it is all about, it's notional, if you like. So the more substantial and solid that literature review is, the greater claim it can make to the potential to make that contribution to knowledge. Hope that's making sense. Now, one other. Back to the issue about critique. Maybe it's coming up again. I'm just getting confused now. I think we'll just move on because we're going to run out of time. We'll come back to the issue of critique because it's really, really crucial. So structure, we're going to focus on the structure of the literature review, and these themes around what a literature review does and what it is will keep coming back throughout the presentation. So where does a lit review sit in the context of your thesis? So as I think I was just going on about, when you're developing your research proposal, there's various elements in the research proposal, the research question, the lit review, and so on. And in a way, they're all mutually informing. So your research questions, you come in with a topic and some questions in mind. So that research question is then developed and nuanced and massaged based on the work that you're doing in reviewing the literature in terms of finding out what's known about this topic and what are the gaps. So I'll try and use my pointer. So you're starting out a research question, and then the literature review is looking at, well, what do we already know about the thesis, about these questions? What still needs to be known? What don't we yet know? And then as you move on, what your research method is then developed, how are you going to investigate this topic? And then what did you find out? And then an interpretation of what those answers mean. So there you can see where the lit review is sitting in the sort of overall story of your research. It perhaps becomes a little bit more clearer when you see it in the context of an overall thesis. So it really depends on the structure of a thesis. So there's 3 examples that we're just going to share with you. Before I do that, just to be really clear, as PhD Masters by Research candidates, your PhD, the structure of your thesis, it's really dependent on the nature of your research, topic and questions, how you conducted your research and your discipline. It's completely up to you to decide how you're going to structure your thesis. There are no rules. Well, there are sort of broadly rules, but RMIT's policy doesn't say there's a particular structure that you must adopt. So these 3 examples we're sharing are really just because they're quite common. It's not that you have to choose one of the 3. These are just examples. So let me go through, follow up on the questions come up in the chat. Let me explain. So the traditional thesis structure pretty much looks like this. It reports on a single study. There's going to be an introduction, a lit review, methods, results, and conclusions. So there's, 5 sections. We've got an overall, this is what the project's about in the intro, then a contextualizing chapter in the lit review, methods, this is what how and why the research has been conducted in the way it is. What did we find out? That's results. Discussion conclusion is, what does it mean? So in this model, you can see the literature review is pretty much a standalone, distinct chapter. And so, for example, you might publish this chapter. This would be, in this sort of model, a standalone literature review is potentially publishable in itself because it's telling a story and actually discovering knowledge about a gap in knowledge, if you like. We'll come back to that. The more complex sort of traditional thesis model looks a bit like this. Does look a bit complex. In this sort of a model, you might have multiple studies. Say you're in engineering and you're doing a series of different investigations. You might be social science and you're doing a series of different studies of a particular population, for example. I shouldn't go too much into examples because it'll lose some of you. But in this sort of a model, you've got various studies, for example, and each of them might have their own distinct lit review. So rather than just have one lit review chapter, you might have a series of small lit reviews. And in this model, for example, there is an overarching umbrella lit review as well. So this sort of more complex thesis structure, I can see it would be very common if you're using, particularly in a series of publications. So each publication, each journal article within it has all the sections you might expect in a thesis. So it's got the intro, the lit review, methods, results, and so on. And then they're packaged up into a whole thesis. There's some concern that it looks very painful. Well, not necessarily. It really just depends on the nature of the topic. In fact, I can report from an examiner's point of view, sometimes these theses where there's a series of discrete studies can actually be really engaging and interesting to read because they can be quite tight and there's a lot of interesting range of new knowledge that's shared. So as Alison says, if you're publishing along the way, this kind of model works really well.
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point from Fong and also yourself, Robin, that Fong saying this is painful, and sometimes the writing for yourself is painful, but you've got to think ahead and think what's going to be less painful for my examiner, because this sort of structure, while it may be painful for you, is actually useful for the reader, the ultimate reader of the thesis, because you're writing that examination.
And Steph, that's a really good point. As researchers, I guess we can go all the way back to thinking about what is research, why do we do research? Well, ultimately the reason we do research is to contribute to knowledge, which means that basically we're doing it for each other. We're doing it for other scholars, we're doing it broadly for the community. So when we write, we're not writing for ourselves, we're writing for the reader, and the reader is other researchers, colleagues, and so on. So that writing with a reader in mind is kind of one of the sort of mindsets that you start to develop as you develop as a researcher. And I think, just to come back to Alison's point there, if you're thinking about your thesis in terms of publications, you're getting so many benefits. You're sort of thinking about the reader, but also it's such a great achievement to publish and disseminate your research. It really is great for motivation. So although there might be pain in the writing, the gain you get is contributing to debate and scholarship in your field, even while you're doing a PhD. So, and also you're kind of knocking off your thesis as you go. So there's a lot of boons. There are also PhD Up webinars on writing for publication and structuring your thesis using publications. So just flag that. So finally, the topic-based thesis. Now this one is more where the thesis is conceptual, for example, where you don't necessarily have case studies and empirical work at all. So in that model, also you may have literature review throughout the thesis. So every chapter is going to be engaging with the literature in some way. In fact, in a way that happens already, but I guess what I mean is in kind of in depth. So just so in summary, the section you call your lit review may not actually be one chapter, it may be 2 or more. And the literature may be used throughout your thesis, particularly for providing a rationale for the study in the introduction, justifying your methodology, and linking your discussion back to past research. And also, but even in the conclusion, because research is going to be, new knowledge is being generated all the time, your literature is something that you're going to be continually updating and engaging with throughout the thesis. Obviously, you don't want the gap that you've been slaving away to fill through your 3 years to suddenly being filled by someone else for submission. That would be bad. However, one way to mitigate that is to publish as you go. But either way, the literature really just means the knowledge in the field, and which means that the literature is something you're going to be wanting to engage with throughout your study, but also throughout the thesis. So where are we up to? So that we just looked at the place of the literature in your thesis, and now we're going to look a bit more at the structure of the lit review, the sort of internal structure within the lit review. Are there any particular questions as we go? Please feel free to put them in the chat, because I'm always conscious with these things that I end up sort of, as I get started, we've got a lot to get through, but please raise any questions or comments or anything you're not sure about, let us know. So let's look at the internal structure. So this slide kind of gives you a sort of broad structure of a lit review, and we see the sort of very common shape, anything to do with theses, which is the V, the funnel, starts wide and narrows in. So we're going to distinguish here between the sort of introduction of the literature review, the body section, and the conclusion. So here's a bit more detail on that. So what we're calling here, it's a broad structure of the lit review, is a sort of map. It's really about mapping or identifying the gap. So the focus is very much on what's the gap in knowledge. A martini shape, that's very nice, I like that. So where's the gap? And actually this we may come back to this, Steph, but just to get back to this question about critique, because I think it's one of those things that we often say, so a literature review should be critical, right? It's not just a list, it needs to be a critical engagement with the field. But that doesn't necessarily mean finding fault. It's not your job to sit back and just go, oh, you're wrong, but no, you got that wrong, that's all wrong, I know better. That's not what the literature review is all about. By gap, we mean, well, okay, there's a particular study that looks at X, Y, and Z. Every particular study is going to be limited to a particular focus, because you can't do everything. So a study looked at X, Y, Z, but that means they didn't look at, what's another letter in the alphabet, P, for example. There's a gap. It's not that there's anything wrong with what they did, but they didn't do everything. See what I mean? It's different than saying, just, how dreadful to just look at X, Y, Z. It's, well, that's interesting, and now we know this, that, and the other about X, Y, and Z, but that still leaves P underexplored or examined. So that's what we mean by finding the gap.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about the relationship between all the different voices in the field as well, and how they relate to what you're doing, because sometimes there might be something that you do find fault with, or you do want to make critique of, but that's all just part of your critical thinking. It's not the fact that you need to sort of take everyone down in order to say your one thing.
Oh, there's a question for Mortiza. So to do with permissions to use graphs, diagrams, and so on. Yeah, sometimes you will need permissions. might have to. I better go on. Maybe Steph, you can have a look at that one.
I will.
But there are also freely available diagrams and things. I forget what it's called, but it'll come to me and I'll let you know. But I'm going to keep going on. So so we've got the sort of broadly introduce the problem and context, focus in a bit on the major concepts, for example, identify where the gap is, so where your research fits. So so there's going to be areas of agreement and so on, but there's going to be, so this study goes this far, but you're going to, it's overlooked this component, and that's that component that you're focusing in your research. So it's positioning what you're doing in relation to the field. It's about finding your allies, peers, where's your, within the broader field, where's your specific community, or by that I don't mean necessarily just people, but where's the research that your proposal kind of really sits closely to. So trying to narrow down, and then within that, what's the contribution you make? So that's the other sort of nuance too about critique, that the finding the gap is not about necessarily, again, finding the faults, but what's the contribution that you're making? Where's the need that you're hoping to be able to address or fill? Thinking back again to that notion of being a researcher as contributing to knowledge, contributing to the field of research, contributing to other researchers. And see, as you become more developed as a researcher, and you build a community of practice, and you have other scholars that you work with, you know, around Australia or the world, it becomes clearer to sort of think like that, because you're sort of thinking, okay, I know what they're doing, but you know, how can I help, basically? What can I do to help solve this issue or solve this problem or so on? So the gap, so this sort of notion of finding a gap is very much about recognising that knowledge is inherently contested. So any knowledge claim, I mean, that's the important work we do as researchers, that we question and we ask questions, not necessarily, well, did they do the research properly, but is there an element that's been overlooked, or how about thinking of putting these two things together, which no one's ever done before, because normally they just think of this side and not that side, for example. So it's about that contestation, but it's also a gap. It's not, a lit review needs to be scoped. You're not, back to those ideas we were talking about earlier on in the presentation, your role is not to map or address all the literature in a particular field, because it's too much. So the work is about making a case for a particular body of knowledge. So whatever you address in your lit review, the studies and things you include in there, you need to be able to make a case for why they're in there and not other work. And finally, the other issue about critique, but I think we've covered off on that one. So, I should have put that up earlier, and that I find some words. So you're making the case for your research, and specifically you're forming an argument for the need for your research. So it's very much the case that while you may, in preparing your lit review, have lists of the various studies that are relevant to your work, the lists themselves are the basis for your lit review. That a lit review is not a list. It's not a list of this is all the studies that are being done in this field. It's got to be an argument, because you're trying to make a case for why your research should be done, why it's necessary, what it has to offer. So therefore, they tend to be very conceptually dense, and is critical and evaluative, rather than merely just descriptive. And just on that point too, if you the notion of a thesis is about an argument. It's about putting forward a claim. It's not just so we often say it's about telling a story. It is about telling a story, but it's telling a story that's trying to really make a case for something. I know I've got primary school kids, and they're forever these days having to write what they call persuasive texts. So they don't just write something; it's persuasive, and actually, I mean, it can be a bit funny sometimes, but in the concept of writing a thesis, it's spot on. It's persuasive. You're trying to persuade the reader of something, not just present some information. So we're going to have a look now at, had a look at the sort of broad structures, and now we're going to look at the various elements within those structures. And I might have to start moving a bit faster because we're over halfway and we've still got a whole bunch of slides to get through. So let's have a look. So we're not going to do the activities as I said before, but you will have these in your pack so that you can have a look at the structure of a literature review, in this case an introduction. Now what I will say is the most useful thing you can do after the session is go to the library, electronically of course, have a look at a thesis in your field, open up, have a look at their lit review and look at how it's been structured and see what you can learn from that. So see if you can identify the various sections. What's the intro bit? What's the middle bit? What's the conclusion? And then how have they framed the literature review? Because the style will differ depending on discipline. So this just provides a bit of a breakdown using different coloured font of the various sections. So it's really an example you can use. Steph, I'm going to go nip through that so we don't run out of time. So you can see the intro section is you're going to be highlighting what are the key trends in the field, drawing out what are the themes, where's the debate, where's the controversy, and the gaps, what don't we know. So to be able to do this in a convincing way, you do need to be across the literature. So you're gonna, and we've got some examples later on about how to mind mapping and so on, so how to do that, but to be able to stand back and say, okay, these are the key trends and themes, this is where the debate is, and these are the gaps. This is not something you're going to do it when you first start drafting your lit review. It's something that you'll figure out along the way, because you'll be able to work that out. But let me make the point, this is why a lit review can be published. And I don't know how many of you've had a look at published lit reviews. They do look a bit different in different disciplines. Really useful for researchers because they're doing this really hard work and generating new knowledge about exactly what are the key trends in the field of knowledge, what are the themes, what are the key controversies, and what are the gaps. That's not just mapping or describing, it's discovering new knowledge. Really important work and really, really useful. But I guess back to that comment earlier about what's hard, it's hard conceptual labour. So I don't think this is going to be easy. Steph, do you have anything you want to add? So we're going to go into the body section. Do you have anything to add at this point?
No, not with regard to oh, that,
okay.
That sound really strange to you?
Yeah, you sound a bit like Darth Vader.
It's just my new voice. I don't have anything to add about the introduction.
Okay. Sasimali, that's a good question. How should the lit review link with the discussion and conclusion of the whole thesis? Well, it's really, because it's the warrant for the research, it's really setting up the basis for the whole project. Like, why is it worth doing? It's worth doing for you personally because it might be interesting. It's only worth doing for the community of researchers because it's producing new knowledge and addressing a gap in knowledge. So if we already know about something, there's really no point in you going off and doing a research project on it because it's already been done, right? So that's why whatever you do throughout the thesis, whatever you write about in the intro and in the conclusion is going to be drawing on this lit review work, because in the intro you're saying this study does this, that, and the other. Why would you do it? Well, because there's a, broadly speaking, a gap in knowledge. And then again in the conclusion about how the work you've done, the discoveries you've made are now actually contributing to filling this gap. And I'll say contributing because no gap is ever fully plugged. Every new contribution to knowledge also opens up new questions and new gaps, and then on we go. So it's never utterly conclusive. Just it's always incremental. Oh no, Ruth, the fear is that someone else will deliver the gap before you get to the end. Absolutely. And well, this is going to sound a bit silly, but my discipline is philosophy. No problem with that, because we've all been going over the same problems for thousands of years, right? Other areas, particularly in technology, IT, probably engineering, it's good to see that one's come out because everyone's really worried about that. Okay, so here it is. If you're really worried about that, publish, publish, publish. Because if you've got the knowledge, the new knowledge out there, even by the time you submit your thesis, you've still got that claim to new knowledge. It's fine for the purposes of your thesis. And because you've published, your name is on it, right? So publish, publish, publish will help you get over that problem. Also, it's part of research, the research design. So if you work with your supervisors, if there's a real issue that you're working in an area that's just so dynamic, you need to then design a research project that's not going to leave you high and dry after 3.5, 4 years. So it is one of the things about research that it will depend on your field. The other thing is, and I know how you feel about this, is this kind of overwhelming literature that exists today. There's so much. I don't know what, I mean, I have read stats about how many papers are published every day. There's thousands, you know, it is overwhelming actually. And a lot of, so yeah, it is overwhelming. Part of the work of a researcher, again, is filtering, working out actually what are the studies, who are the researchers, what are the research teams that actually really matter and I really need to keep an eye on, and what's peripheral. So that filtering work is also partly what you need to develop. And I guess there's always a balance, isn't there, between kind of staying on top of your field and feeling permanently anxious. You don't want to feel permanently anxious. So finding a way, and I mean, one way I would recommend is talk to your supervisors, talk to other, particularly other PhD candidates a bit further down the track to you. How do they manage this? Like, what techniques do they use so they feel like they know what's going on in the field, but they're not overwhelmed by it? So just to the body section again, the body, so we've had a little bit of a look at the intro to a lit review. The middle section, it's not going to be a list of articles that might form the basis of your lit review, but it wouldn't actually be presented in this form because if you do that, you're not evaluating and discussing why the literature is, these studies are relevant to your research. So there's various ways of structuring the discussion of the literature in the body. Topic-based, well, I'll go through we've got examples of each of these, so let me just go through this. Remember, choosing the organisational structure really depends on your research, so there's no rules again. So there might be thematically where various themes are introduced as they're relevant. It could be, here's an example of a thematically organised lit review. I'm not going to do the activity, sorry everybody. Topics, so here's an example of a topic-based structure. Well, it doesn't give you, I wonder if there's a slide missing here, Steph, anyway. a chronological structure. So this would be based on in time. So in this example, there is it goes from historical, historical context working up to the present day. So that would be a kind of chronological organisation. And then this is structured based on theories. So you can see this kind of presenting, grouping different theories that are relevant to the research. So here's an example. Different theories of income support and so on. So then you're grouping like theories together, if you like. Is it? And methodologies. So another way the literature review might be based on different studies based on, studies using different methodologies. So the quantitative research, qualitative research, and so on. The message here really is however you structure your lit review, you need to have a rationale for it. So it's not just a grab bag of literature. You've got to be able to say and explain the review is organised in this way for this reason. You just have to be able to make a case for it. And it wants to be structured in a way that works for your research.
Robin, sorry to interject. I know we're running out of time here, but we've just had a few questions about going back to the theme organisation slide.
There. So what's the problem with context? So different themes relevant to the research, and then again, whatever you're doing, you're going to be grouping, finding commonality. So there's, let me try and think of an example in my work. Usually what I'd be looking at is various theories of, say end user engagement in PhD. So there's the sort of thematic that's to do looking at the end user perspective. Another theme might be the way in which educational programs are designed to address end user engagement. See what I mean? But it just so much depends on your particular topic. So I will shoot that through there. So
and I think you would know if you had that kind of PhD, because that would be, your approach would be looking into these sort of various windows and then bringing things together.
If you're not sure, and there's a good chance you're not, because you're all at various stages in your degree, the aim with these sessions is to give you a bunch of ideas and insights and different approaches. Go away, have a think about it, talk to your supervisors, what would be most useful for me. And I'm going to say this repeatedly, have a look at examples. So when you look at other theses in your field, particularly if they're relevant to your research, how have they structured their lit review? Is it thematic? Is it chronological? Is it something else entirely? But often when we read, we're reading for the ideas and the content. It's also a good idea to read for structure. How's this writing been structured? How's it organised? And learn from that too. So here's a little bit more on capturing and synthesising themes in the literature. So this might help some of those questions. And just again, there's a couple of examples, and it really depends on what's going to work for you. But this is really how you try and, as back to this, we all get overwhelmed by the literature, how to manage it and organise it so that you can stay on top of it, and as you write the lit review, you can draw on the key themes and issues. So this is just an example of it using a table. So you can see there's the various authors of papers along the top, and then the themes are identified along the side. And that way you can group the articles and not lose track of them, basically. And, some articles might overlap. Again, have a look for literature review articles in your field, because they see how they've grouped the themes, And they're also very useful because they can do a lot of the work for you if they're very thorough. Now I think that's a table approach. Here's a mind map approach. I can tell you I'd be going with the table approach. That looks really confusing to me. But actually, probably the reality is that you probably use a bit of all multiple approaches, because actually mind maps are really useful for just getting it on the page and thinking, okay, what are the key themes, sketching it out, and and then maybe from a mind map you move down to something looking a bit more organized, like a table. So there's a couple of examples here that you can use in your own time to follow up if you want to do a bit more work to sort of think about structures and themes. So Ruth's got a question: does the lit review also include original text, the novel as well as the criticism? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Ruth, in terms of a novel.
I'm wondering if you're asking whether because Ruth, you said you were doing a creative writing PhD. I suppose that you'd be reviewing literature about a specific novel. In that case, you would also need to include, cite and introduce the novel itself. So that would be within your review. And
possibly related novels that the novel might be.
Yeah, I think Ruth touched on something that's really interesting with regard to creative practice, because you have the artifact and then the criticism about it. What I find useful, Ruth, is to think about the idea that you as a researcher have relationship to ideas and practices, and that's all part of your review. So there's the creative work, and then what's been said about the creative work, and you're positioning your own research practice within all of that. So the answer that I would give you is yes.
Actually, Steph, that also raises something that's sort of sitting within I think a lot of the comments that have come up, which is about where you sit in relation to the work and as a writer, and that becoming that role of writing, being authoritative, taking a critical stance, those sorts of things. And we will be looking at that in a lot more detail in the follow-up, next week on the writing approach. But there's also other webinars on authoritative writing and so on, and that all these things will help sort of the various pieces fall into place. Now, Donna, word count for lit review. Okay, so I'm glad you raised this one. So a typical PhD thesis is around 80,000 words, but there is absolutely no requirement that a thesis should be that long. In fact, there's no minimum or maximum word length. So the length of a thesis, the length of a chapter, the length of a lit review, all these things are actually just dependent on the nature of your research. So the thing to think about is not so much length, but what your writing does. So it's really about the how long should the lit review be, is really how long does it need to be in order to do the things that it needs to do, which is to, establish the warrant for your work, address all the key literature in your field, not all the literature in your field, but the literature that matters, that's relevant to your research topic, and so on. So for some, it really does depend on the topic. Sometimes, there may be very little literature that's relevant to your project. In that case, your review will be making the case that actually there's very little out there, right? Alternatively, there may be tons of literature, so the work will be about really refining and filtering and saying there's all this masses of literature out there, but it's actually these particular studies, for example, that are the most important. So
I think there's also something to be said about that one of the first points that came up around whether or not you include everything. And I think we find that that sometimes, we think through writing, and so we create this big literature review as we're thinking about different types of literature, but then at the end you might actually need to edit that down because some things are no longer relevant. So you might find on it that, you know, you have quite a large literature review, but as you approach or refine the research, you may edit that down.
The other thing, thanks Steph, the other thing too, if you think back to the different ways of structuring your lit review and the thesis, is to not just think about it in terms of a section. The key themes, the existing knowledge, your contribution to the existing knowledge, they actually will be filtering all the way through the thesis in different ways. So if the body of existing material is just really vast, like anything, you just need to be able to filter, but importantly, make a case for what, if you have to cut down and say, actually, I'm going to have to leave this whole field out, you need to, the important thing is to say that's what you're doing and defend it. So whatever you do, make a case for what you're doing. Now, sorry, there was another question, Christine. Yeah, so this just finally having a look at the concluding section of the lit review, not the whole thesis. This is the lit review, just to be clear. So the conclusion, so we looked at the intro and then the middle part. The conclusion is going to summarise the major contributions that you've made to this in your analysis. So the insights you've made, it's going to highlight where the gaps are in the existing literature, and link that body of work to your research question or problem, to your project, to your topic. So you're going to be doing a bit of that in the intro to the lit review, and then the discussion, the middle section, is all basically in response to your particular question or problem, because that's kind of the whole thing is going to be tethered to your particular question or problem. I think that's actually, what have we got? Oh, so here's a bit of an example which you can have a look through. Oh, thank you and questions. How's that? Oh, and it's 11 o'clock. How's that for time? Okay, everyone, we do actually, we've got a little bit of time. We were aiming to present the slides in the hour, and we've got a few minutes left over for questions. So I'm conscious we've whipped through a lot of content. So a question from Tony: in a rapidly evolving and dynamic tech field, the finalisation of the lit review, yeah, Tony, in fact, in every field, you're not going to be able to cross-tick off the box for literature review work until you're ready to submit, because you do need to make sure that you're up to date with the field. And remember to perhaps think about it not so much in terms of a chapter, but that work that you're doing. What's the work? What it is actually about establishing your field and the contribution to knowledge. So in particular, that the concluding chapter of your thesis, if you have a separate conclusion, is going to be very much looking at reflecting back on the context, which is the lit review work.
I think a student called Sten made an interesting point just before they left the chat, saying that it was really useful to have this session as they were coming toward the completion and the submission phase of their work. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, especially if you're starting. These are ideas and structures and processes that you should be thinking about all throughout your PhD.
Alison, yeah, there definitely are still the one-on-one sessions for PhD writing support. So I'm pretty sure Steph will give you the link for that. And everybody, if you don't know that service is available, really useful. You can make a time with a writing specialist research writing specialist from the library and get some feedback on draft chapters and so on.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to look at your work, and I'll post a quick link now in the chat for that form?
So yeah, Somali, you'll all receive the slides and the recording, so you can review. Oh, have we missed any? Please also feel free to. Hello.
Sorry, Robin. A student asked whether there are any tips for making the contents of a literature review. I think that's probably that's very dependent on your own research question, and the question itself might be a good place to start to think about those key terms and what you're engaging with. But maybe for more content related questions, it might be good to start with the general conversation with your supervisors. I'm not sure what you would recommend there, Robin.
Yeah, I think the same. And I really recommend have a look at theses in the library from the research repository that will look for examples that are related to your field to see how they've been organised, what's the content. Particularly, of course, your supervisors can help guide you and get you started. But it is one of those things. Ruth wants to read your thesis, Steph.
Oh, you absolutely can. It's on the research repository if you're interested.
I can
send you a link, Ruth. And another thing to think about is maybe the subject guides as well as a place to start, or broad databases in your area. Oh, we can also use Rob. She'll mail it to you.
Oh, it's an old school. It's in hard form. The other day I ran one of these and I somehow managed to spend the whole time showing off my thesis. It's pretty old by now. No one wants to read it.
My thesis is actually one of the first student theses to be uploaded to the new repository, which is exciting. So if I can.
What is the new repository?
It's researchrepository.rmit.edu.au. And I'm just trying to navigate it now while I talk to you.
How is it different to the old
Michelle,
one?
I'm still here. It's a new platform, Robin, and it's just in its early stages, but there's going to be a lot more functionality than the old one had. So, but all the content's been transferred across, so that's exciting.
Oh, I have to check it out.
Slowly getting rebuilt in this new platform.
Let me come back to this. And Ruth, I'll send you the link. I'll put it in the chat. This is my PhD. And I might also flag that there's a PhD Up session on writing strategies for creative practice research. That will be later on in the year in November. So that might be something you're interested in.
Steph, I've opened your thesis.
Thank you.
I'm going to read it all now.
Yeah, and you just mail me yours.
Well, sadly, mine's actually not available electronically. It's too old.
I think there is a process. Oh, actually, I'm not sure, but there might be a process for digitizing.
Oh.
If we submitted our thesis in the repository, can we still publish from the thesis? Yes, you can. I'm quite sure.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Absolutely. The work that you present for is the writing that you've presented as part of a course of study is not strictly considered published for the purposes of wider, from a journal point of view. Mm-hmm. However, there are actually, it can be a bit tricky. Some journals are less likely to want to publish work that's already available on a research repository. So two solutions. One is publish as you go. Don't wait till you're finished. The other one is that it is possible to have an embargo on your thesis so that you can publish and not be disadvantaged by those issues. But the important thing about the research repository is that it is actually available to everybody. So it does mean that your work is can reach audiences who don't have access to journals and so on. So it is really important to get it into the repository.
Yeah. Are there any?
Yeah, Fong, the information about embargoes and things, that's all available when you're in the submission for examination. When you start to go down into that process, I mean, unless you are right now, but you'll find that all there. Okay, do we? Okay, yeah. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to find the link. You do it at the point of submission, I'm pretty sure, but I'll just go and find the link and I'll post it. Just a sec.
Yeah, I think it's toward the very end. Yeah, I've had a few questions about the link to the recording of this, and just to reiterate, that will be sent via email within the coming days. So you'll receive all the slides and the recording link and a feedback link as well in a few days.
And I've just posted the feedback link as well in the chat if anyone wants to just do it now, because sometimes it's easier straight after. So I'll just put that in again.
Thanks, Michelle. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think this is the right one. No, not that one. Sorry. I did post it earlier for people, so hopefully they.
Oh, that was the other one. Figshare. I was thinking of.
The new. That's the new repository for data.
Mm.
Yeah,
So people can publish their data now if they want to into Figshare.
So I don't know if that person's still around, but if anyone's wondering, it's an open share platform for sharing. So I'm writing, talking too much.
Pauline sent a question about whether we can access theses from other universities. Yes, other universities have research repositories, and you're able to access those uploaded theses as well.
I mean, that just bear in mind, once you've completed and your thesis is all available on a repository like RMIT's, it is actually Google searchable worldwide. You've published on the internet, if you like. It's not considered a publication in the sort of narrow sense of a book or a journal, but it is actually just, disseminated worldwide.
Mm.
Our panel, thanks Rachel, our panel members used to seeing imperfect and underdeveloped drafts during the second milestone. My draft is not perfect and I'm out of time. Really good question, Rachel. Just remember that the milestones, that it is developmental. So, it doesn't have to be perfect. It may be underdeveloped. The key thing for you is to acknowledge and recognise there's still work to be done here. I can see some, this is yet to be resolved. I've got these questions that I'm still working on. So where you see that there are aspects of your draft lit review and other sections that are unresolved, just highlight it. And then you're telling the panel that you know that you're aware of that. They may come back and say, we'd prefer to see more progress at this stage. You don't know. But what they really want to see is that you recognise where the work is that's yet to be done. So, I think it's certainly there's an expectation that you'll be writing and rewriting chapters of your thesis right up to submission. So no one's expecting to see the drafts during the second milestone that are ready, or even the third milestone. Third milestone also is just about saying that, will you soon be ready to submit, not that it is now ready to submit. So Rachel, I hope that helps clarify.
I think it's also, it's an opportunity to get feedback on those things that you are working on. And, if there's something you're struggling with and it's something that you're finding you're not really able to wrap up before your second milestone, it would it might actually be useful for you to sort of show that to the panel. I know what you mean, Rachel. I'm a massive perfectionist too, but I've got to say my third milestone document was a huge scramble and an absolute mess. And that was a massive learning curve for me, because I just went in and said, this is the mess. Can you please help me, think about all these things that I'm trying to bring together. So, yeah,
it's
showing
tricky,
your
isn't
work
it?
is a big part of doing a PhD. And
yeah, it is tricky. I had to laugh with the perfectionist. It is really hard. But I know from being a panel member, what you're looking for is the recognition on the part of the candidate that you know that things are ill-formed and there's still questions and things. What you worry about is if the work is ill-formed and all of that, but the candidate doesn't see it. They think it's all fine. That's the problem that we want to avoid. So, but all writing is incremental. It's never perfect. Can always and particularly actually if we can take this back to this whole notion of critique as well. Our insights and our ability to understand ideas and things are always partial. We never get the whole picture. We're always getting one aspect and not another. So there's always more to be done. There's always the potential for new insights and so on. Picture, that's good.
Yeah, Rachel, I think it's part of the process of a PhD. I think it's a big lesson that you can learn.
I remember the worst mistake I made when I started a PhD was I just thought I couldn't quite come to terms with the whole idea that I was doing a PhD. I just thought that was like, what? And I kept thinking just from the very beginning that because I was doing a PhD on a particular topic, I should know everything about that topic. And it was a real setback because it stopped me asking questions, because I kind of felt like, but shouldn't I already know I'm doing a PhD on this topic? But you don't. You're starting out.
Yeah, I felt the same, Robin, and it required this shift of thinking. Like, I'm here. I'm an adventurer in the field of knowledge. I'm trying to find things. This is exciting, rather than every day or moment being a test of the knowledge that you already have.
Yeah, that would be a good PhD Up session.
Yeah, I've been thinking that there's something to be said for sort of perfectionism and showing your work when it's not necessarily perfect, and that sort of thing. Thanks everyone. Some love coming through on the comments. Well, if you enjoyed this session, feel free to put it in the feedback form that Michelle's posted.
I think it sounds like we're wrapping up. Well, thank you everybody, those who are left, and look forward to seeing you next time.